I have Dr. Frans Cronje with me from the Social Research Foundation. Frans Cronje, thanks you so much for joining us at National Security News.
Linda, nice to see you again.
Well, a very interesting poll came out giving the Democratic Alliance, the official opposition party in South Africa, a lead over the ANC. What is your response to that?
Yeah, I used to work for those guys a couple of years ago. I I haven't looked in detail at the data, but it makes sense to us. Essentially, what they've got is the ANC and the DA both at around 30%. Now, you'll recall in May of last year, South Africa had an election. The ANC came in at 40%. Subsequent to that, there have been polls that have put them in the 30s. And given the past 6 weeks, where the ANC has been pressing quite hard for an increase in VAT, so in taxation, we know from our own work that that's deeply unpopular in ANC ranks. So that's the first thing. Secondly, threatening South Africa's unity government. That's also unpopular in ANC ranks. So that's the second thing. Thirdly, we know that a lot of ANC voters had hoped that this might be the reform moment, and that the ANC was prepared to go into government with a DA, that would show that it was serious about reform. But in terms of South Africa's bigger economic indicators, fixed investment, growth, jobs, etc., not much has happened. So there's a lot of ANC disillusionment. So that explains why the ANC goes into the 30s. And then two specific things have happened. Before the ANC lost the election last year, ANC voters were very worried that if the ANC ever did lose its majority, that the country would collapse into chaos and anarchy. And then the ANC did lose its majority, and there's no more chaos and anarchy than there was before. So that fear has fallen away. And the second fear was quite deeply held at the function of South Africa's sometimes hysterical media reporting, was ANC voters who believed in great numbers, I think it was 7 out of 10, that if the DA ever got into government or became influential at the national level, it would seek to rebuild a former sort of apartheid administration. And they've now seen the DA in government. Doesn't look as if that's what it's trying to do. So two of the factors that were very important in holding ANC voters in the ANC, already disillusioned ANC voters, have fallen away. Read that against the push for the tax increase, the threat to the GNU, and the disappointment that reform has not yet materialized. And pushing the ANC down into the low 30s. Remember, polls always have margins of error. I guess this one must have 3 or 4 points on it. So low 30s, that makes complete sense. Yeah, Linda.
Sure, that means massive growth for the DA because the DA's support was sort of static. There wasn't massive growth for them in the last election. So if this translates into an election, that could be really interesting.
Something you see in DA growth over time is that between elections, its support does go up a bit. And what part of that is kind of dissident ANC voters. It's really up now because the black share of the vote that supports the DA is sharply up. That does happen to a degree between elections, has been happening for some time. And then just at the moment of the election, the ANC puts its very impressive election machinery into operation. The DA vote share gets knocked back a little bit. So it's not what's happening here is not off the charts unusual. The numbers are unprecedented. But the trends are things we've been seeing coming for a very long time. And I think as you look at South Africa now out over the next 2 or 3 years into its next national election, which is in 2029, should reform continue to evade the government, it's plausible that you could see the DA make a serious assault on the 30% mark. They might even go above it. And you'll see the ANC from above making assault on the 8% mark, and it might even get somewhere close to it. And there's a very straightforward lesson in that, I think, and this has been evident in South Africa's economic and political data and the interface between the two for the last 30 years. That South African voters are centrist, pragmatic, and they vote on economic circumstances. And the ANC once commanded 70% of the vote. That was about 10 years into South Africa's democracy because it had done very well in raising the basic living standards of people. And over the past 20 years or so, living standards have slipped, and the growth rate has slipped, and the fixed investment rate has slipped. And as that happens, ANC vote share deteriorates. And understanding South Africa, if it remains a free society, into the longer term, its political patterns, so that's really all you need to know, is a South African government, doesn't matter who runs it, that's unable to draw the investment to raise the rate of growth, to create jobs and improve living standards, is going to have a very difficult time remaining in power. Yeah.
So how the ANC is doing in this poll, does it have anything to do with the inroads that the Umkhonto Sizwe party is making into the party?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, one of the things that happens to the ANC is as confidence in it begins to fade, because living standards aren't, the aspirations for increased living standards aren't being met. The politics fragments, and you get these smaller parties that start to come about. And had that not happened, DA growth on its own wouldn't have been sufficient to bring the ANC to below 50%. You can perhaps think of these smaller parties as the stepping stones away from the ANC, perhaps towards something else. And the splintering into the EFF, remember that came out of the ANC all those years ago. And then MK, very much the same thing. Something that ANC might bank on, but it's a bit futile, is that if MK's got, EFF's got some internal personal issues, and if those debilitate it to the point that it can't function, maybe some of that vote comes back to the ANC, and in the short term, that's possible. Another thing that I hope for is that without Mr. Zuma, he is mortal, that some of the MK vote might wash back into the ANC temporarily, and that might also happen. And if those things happen just ahead of a South African election, the ANC might get a little bump. But there are ANC thinkers around who think this might be sufficient to take it back above 50% and hold it there, and they are wrong. They're getting their analysis wrong, because they forget that these voters left the ANC in the first place. They forget that they departed from the ANC not because it wasn't radical enough or populist enough. None of those things. It departed from the ANC because it was disappointed, that vote. And its disappointment rests again in one simple idea, that voter behavior in South Africa is motivated by the material circumstances of people. And only if you are able to inculcate in the minds of voters the realistic belief, this is as the chap who advises us, who's extremely good, puts it, inculcate the realistic belief that in government you can make people's lives better. Only then do you really have a shot at being a sustainable future South African governing administration.
Well, right now we're sitting in a situation, if you can believe the headlines, that the GNU is teetering, that it might break up, or there could be a deal. What is your view on that?
I wouldn't worry too much about which way it goes now. That probably needs some explaining. The first point to make is the GNU was an extremely good thing, and we advised very strongly on its in favor of the GNU at the time. And had it not happened at the time, and had the ANC chosen the alternative of MK and the EFF, the sentiment response could have been so devastating that South Africa might never have recovered from it. However, in the 250 days now, I think it's something like that, that the GNU's been around, the ANC has taken the firm view that it will not be dictated to by its partner in government, that it will continue to run South Africa in as far as it can, the ANC as an executive authority, and that if it's seen to capitulate to the DA on questions of policy, it will make it look weak. And that weakness following the 40% defeat and looking powerful is important politically, particularly here. It might suffer further losses. And I think it's always quite important. Our clients, I mean, it's what we're trying to do for clients sometimes, is try and get them to understand how the other side of each equation sees things. The ANC thinks if it capitulates the DA on policy, following the defeat, the sense will be overwhelmingly of capitulation, and one capitulation will follow another and another and another, and that conceding to the DA on policy, even where the ideas are sensible, even where there are ANC ideas, that could be a fatal political miscalculation. That is how the ANC sees it. I think it's wrong to see it that way, but this is how it sees it. So it says hell no on conceding to the DA. The DA, on the other hand, has a decision to make. Does it stay in the government in an environment where it knows that it will not be taken seriously and treated as a partner, even a minority partner? And it's got a moment of leverage over the ANC now, because the ANC makes a serious mistake in trying to increase the tax rate that's universally unpopular. The DA latches onto that and says, we're stopping you right here. And if the DA lets the ANC off on tax, the leverage it currently holds, that's held up the government for the last 6 weeks, is lost, and ANC will go back to the behavior of before. And the DA has a choice. It can bank the win, say we stopped the VAT increase, went back into GNU. Or it can say, look, we're in government to make a serious difference to people's lives. And if we're not in a position to do that, we have alternative options that are open to us. So if you, I think there's a lot to be said for trying to understand the positions that both parties are in and the decisions they might take. I don't know what decisions they're going to take now. The ANC wishes to continue as a minority government. That's pretty clear. The DA decision, I'm not well enough briefed on to know where they are on that at the moment. But both sides of the argument have a certain degree of merit. So, why do I say don't worry about this? The broad trends in the country, as we set out earlier on in this conversation, that material circumstances drive voter behavior, ANC well below 50, that even the collapse of NK and the EFF may not be enough to save. These trends are not stopping anytime soon. The little growth that the DA has seen is likely to continue. You never know who its future leader may be and how that causes the party to resonate culturally with voters that perhaps haven't always felt that it resonates with their aspirations. Come 2029, we go to this next election. If at that point Mr. Ramaphosa is no longer the ANC leader, which is likely, and if at that point the DA has identified a compelling leader's change, the current chaps have done as well as they can, a compelling leader. South Africa's economic performance hasn't been stellar, so the relationship between that and diminishing ANC support continues. We'll be back at a new GNU moment, and the potential to put together another governing administration. And it's frustrating for people who live in the country. I do, and you wish that it would recover really, really quickly, and it could, but that's not happening at this juncture. But what is that despite the disappointment, the pace at which the country is changing is lightning fast. Public opinion is absolutely moderate and centrist and sensible in the main. We're a completely unradicalized society. We're also an emerging market where it gets into economic trouble, it changes peacefully. through politicians arguing with each other in parliament. That's very fortunate, you know. South Africans tend sometimes to take things for granted. And many emerging markets before us, post-colonial ones, when they got into trouble, the trouble ends with people shooting each other in the streets. And South Africa's not there at all. It's changing peacefully with a pragmatic population. The trajectory is towards a coalition government. And whether that has to be interrupted at times, the lessons will be learned. The partners might emerge understanding each other better. And so I wouldn't see, even if there's a breakup of the GNU now, as if that has altered the trajectory that the country's on. And come 2029, we're going to be right back here again. We'll have learned a lot of lessons. ANC may be weaker. The DA may be stronger. There may be other players. There may be different leaders around. And we will at that point, and perhaps at some ahead of that, even if I'm not saying the GNU breaks up, I don't know. But even if it did, the trajectory into 2029 will be that of the last several years. And the potential for positive change in South Africa through a future coalition, which the partners respect each other, because they know that the other are powerful too and ruthless. And that's what the DA is demonstrating now. The ANC's always had a reputation for ruthlessness. Match that with a pragmatic populace, predictable economic trends. That this is not the end of the reform equation for South Africa. We're at the beginning of the GNU process, not at its end, and it still has a long way to go before a formula has come upon that could see the reforms necessary for South Africa to become a highly successful society.
And then there's foreign policy. Can we turn to that? South Africa is in the crosshairs of the Trump administration. We've seen it with sanctions looming on senior ANC leaders. But we see there is a new representative, was there a special representative being sent to Washington or to speak to the Trump administration, and that's Misubisi Jonas. Is that a good choice?
Look, as I see the relationship with America, to make a first point, it's a vast opportunity for everyone, for the GNU, for the DA, for the ANC, for all South Africans. South Africa's fundamental problem, the ANC's core problem, is that South Africa's rate of fixed investment as a share of the size of the economy is far below that of other emerging markets, with the effect that our rate of economic growth is so very low, we can't create any jobs, we can't improve material circumstances of people. The single greatest source of capital to commit to South Africa sits inside the United States. That has strategic interests in the Southern African region. Don't think South Africa is exceptional in that regard. The Americans have great fallback positions in Namibia, and particularly in Angola now. So,
And in Zimbabwe now.
yeah. I mean, the Zimbabweans have responded probably in a manner that the Trump administration approved of to the tariffs, and even little Lesotho that apparently no one has ever heard of. Lesotho's responded. I was in DC last week, and the sense I got from that is that a lot of Africa had responded very positively to the tariff situation. South Africa might have been a bit of an exception. So getting the diplomacy right with the United States has the prospect of South Africa sealing a very attractive. South Africans are going to have to do a lot of work to get there. But the prospect of a very attractive trade and investment arrangement that might in and of itself be sufficient to change South Africa's economic fortunes is definitely a plausible result if we get the diplomacy right. And at the moment, South Africa hasn't done that. As of last week, there wasn't a single serious diplomat in America to talk. Some of the delegations that had gone across from South Africa, I think, had misread the room in the US and what was expected. And there has been, I'm not evading your question here. I think Mr. Jonas has been appointed. There are going to be some lifted eyebrows around that because he's the chairman of a South African company in Iran,
MTN.
and the to what extent that might make it difficult for him to succeed in his mission, we still going to have to see, Linda.
Can we talk about his link to MTN and Iran and Israel? Why is that a problem?
I don't want to get into deep detail of that, but I will say this, that as I understand it, the US has certain expectations of South Africa now. Uh, One is that it's just not feasible to think that American firms, particularly in light of this administration, the new American one, are going to invest in South Africa if that investment is taxed through PE on arrival. This is one of the things that's going to have to be addressed. A second question that's important is property rights. And contrary to a lot of what's going around the Western media, South Africa's new expropriation legislation, it's in the main a land reform measure. It's a piece of legislation that allows the seizure of any fixed or movable property without compensation. And between that and the tax on investor capital on arrival, South Africa is just simply positioned as an emerging market that cannot be competitive. And if you're an American strategist and looking at South Africa, you're saying, hey, you guys are a 1% growth economy with a 30% unemployment rate and policies that prevent you from getting out of that. You really aren't a good long-term bet to build relationships with. You could easily, in the fullness of time, with that unemployment rate and that growth rate, get overwhelmed by desperation and populism. And that's correct. And a third expectation, I think, on the US side is that South Africa will desist from whatever actions it is that the Americans believe, and assume they have some basis for that South Africa threatens US national security interests. And that's distinct from trading with China or Russia or anything of that nature. That's not that. And if my sense of it is that if South African envoys can read that room right and say there has to be a way to get American investors out of this taxation on the right. It's a kind of a tariff, in a sense. It's just not going to fly. There's no, just to be explicit, there is no way the relationship works with that in place anymore. And putting market value back in the expropriation bill is perfectly doable. There are some South African analysts around that say constitutionally it's not, but they're just wrong. They wish for it not to be, but it can be done. It's the best interest of the country to do it. And then thirdly, whatever it is in foreign policy, a lot of that, I imagine, attaches to Iran ties, would just need to be dropped. And then, hit those three notes.
Israel?
Well, I think the latter point goes with Israel as well. Formal relations should be reestablished. A lot of it comes down to, I suppose, where does South Africa prioritize its own national interest? Where does the ANC prioritize its own interest in survival? And the ANC of the last 15 years has done very badly at prioritizing its own interests to survive. It has often allowed considerations of ideology and sometimes corruption to override decisions and actions that would have allowed it to retain its political majority. I'd make it as simple as this: had after 2018, when when into 19, as Mr. Zuma exits, Mr. Ramaphosa becomes leader. Had Mr. Ramaphosa found a creative way not to get drawn into the expropriation question, which was a trap, a Trojan horse left behind, which has single-handedly sabotaged the prospects of the South African economy growing at anything approaching emerging market norms. Had that trap been avoided, had the young Ramaphosa administration just got the growth rate up to average 3%, you're still only at, 2/3 of the emerging market average there. But had you got that right, and you understand the relationship between that and job creation, I tell you the ANC today would be far above 50%. So I suppose the question to ask as you see South Africa approach this relationship with the US is, can that change? Can the ANC staring at being, pushed to very low levels politically, as that reality looms large, does that inspire the survival instinct? And I would tell you that I think if the ANC wishes to survive politically in South Africa, it needs to do a deal with the United States this year still, because short of that, there's no way that it's going to get the fixed investment rate up anywhere near where it needs to be to create the growth and the jobs to reverse its what from some of this data you started this call with looks like an accelerating descent.
Dr. Frans Cronje, thanks so much for speaking to us.
Linda, a great pleasure.